Welcome and happy Pride. I'm Olivia Katranjian, the founder of the International Armenian Literary Alliance, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to Arachiner, or Firsts, our reading and discussion on queer Armenian literature. In honor of Pride Month, IALA is hosting two events with the Queer Armenian Library and Hye-Phen Magazine. Last weekend, readers from around the world shared their writing, and it was heartwarming as we try to build an Armenian literary community to see many audience members stay for a long time afterwards to chat. And I'm happy to see many of you back here today. Today, we bring together groundbreaking writers from our community to read from their work and engage in lively discussion. Panelists include Nancy Agabian, Armen Ohanyan, Kamee Abrahamian, Michael Barakiva, and Arlene Avakian. IALA has received its first grant to fund this event from poets and writers, and we're honored to be supported by such a respected institution. The event will last for about 90 minutes and will be recorded. I'd like to introduce our moderator, J.P. Boghossian. He is a dear friend, the founder of the Queer Armenian Library, one of IALA's board members, and a powerful writer. J.P., I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Olivia, and thank you to IALA and the Hye-Phen Magazine. This is an event that I would have loved to have seen when I was 15 and 25, and so I'm glad and honored to be here helping to organize this today. And events these days always seem to be marketed as a big deal and or one of a kind, but trust me when I say, as the person who spent 4 years putting together the Queer Armenian Library, today's event is a big deal and one of a kind, a reading and a discussion that we named Arachiner, or Firsts. The work of each of our readers and panelists has been groundbreaking for queer Armenian writing, and in many instances has been a first, as in the first to write in a particular genre from a particular identity. To be a first, or to be challenging and queering the heteronormative writing we've inherited, means that there are all the regular challenges of publishing, but also the challenge of having to navigate a space where queer and Armenian identities can clash and bang and harmonize and venerate and clarify and complicate, and then subvert all of those binaries. In the next 90 minutes, each of our panelists will share a reading with us, after which we'll dive into our panelists' experience of what it is to be a queer Armenian writer, what motivates their writing, what has the reception been like for their work, and how they navigate and relate queerness with Armenian identity. Finally, we will have a time at the end for our audiences to ask questions of our esteemed panelists. Our first reader is Nancy Agabian. Nancy is a writer, teacher, and literary organizer working in the spaces between race, ethnicity, cultural identity, feminism, and queer identity. Her recent novel, The Fear of Large and Small Nations, was a finalist for the PEN Bellwether Prize for Socially Engaged Fiction. She is the author of Me as Her Again, True Stories of an Armenian Daughter, a memoir that was honored as a Lambda Literary Award finalist for LGBT nonfiction and shortlisted for a William Saroyan International Writing Prize. It was also the first memoir by an Armenian American woman identifying as bisexual. This year, Lambda Literary awarded Nancy the Jean Cordova Prize for Lesbian Queer Nonfiction. Please give a warm welcome to Nancy Agabian.
Thank you so much, JP. And thanks so much, IALA, Hye-Phen, and Queer Armenian Library for all the work you've done to arrive at such a hopeful moment with queer Armenian writers, not just gathered, but centered and supported. I'm really honored to be with everyone here, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So I'm primarily a nonfiction writer. Even when I work in other genres, my creative impulse comes from life experience. So I'm going to read an excerpt from my unpublished novel, The Fear of Large and Small Nations, which is about an abusive, narcissistic relationship that I entered when I was living in Armenia for a year in 2006. As I was crafting it, I found myself needing to write in third person to gain emotional distance from it, and that's where the fiction came in. I also used reflection, like a memoir, to make sense of what I was creating. This is the first time I've read this particular passage out loud. It's when the protagonist, whose name is Na, finds herself attracted to Seyran, a much younger man, who she's been told by someone else is gay. and she's very puzzled and upset by her attraction. It was Na's pattern to go from gender to gender. She tried one, and when it didn't work out, she felt drawn to the other. The last person she had been with was a woman a couple of years ago, but it had only lasted a few months. They got involved too fast, and the woman revealed herself to abuse alcohol before she dumped Na, the needy codependent. Before that, she'd been with a man for 3 years, someone she thought she would marry. But he was much older than her and wanted her to move with him to a small Midwestern city where she would have no friends. She stayed with him a couple of months and their relationship faltered. When she returned to New York, he told her that he wanted her to take care of him full-time and not write. It had been a painful breakup for her because he had been a kind man, the first person that she felt truly loved her, and she still faced moments of regret, still wondered if he had really said what he had said, or if she had misinterpreted that one sentence, "I want you to take care of me full time and not write." She wondered if she were just a selfish artist who was always meant to suffer. Rather than consider that loving a man can sometimes be painfully sexist, she hoped that finding someone in Armenia would free her from her doubts and absolve her of any possible wrongdoing. Now, feeling she had misread cues from Seydan, she beat herself up for being bisexual, as if it were a choice. She didn't allow that there was nothing wrong with being attracted to men who expressed a sensitive side. Nor did she think about the fact that most of the people she had been attracted to in the past possessed significant aspects of both genders. So it wasn't some kind of strange aberration for her to be attracted to Seydan in his sexual ambiguity, especially since he paid attention to her, even writing her a poem. Instead, she was just very hard on herself. And she didn't know that this was one reason why Seydan was drawn to her. From her journal. "The thing is, I feel incredibly sad for Seydan. He has to go to the army at the end of his studies, and he doesn't want to. They will tear him apart. He told me 2 people beat him up when he was in college simply because he had long hair. When we were walking down the street, a man leered at me. It was icky. When I told Seydan, he said, 'Don't get upset or sad when people look at you this way. Maybe he was looking at me funny.' He laughs a lot, all the time. He has to laugh. It's a craziness. He's partially crazy, and I think maybe he needs someone to tell him in his life that he's okay. For some reason, I feel like that person is me. It makes me so sad that people can't just feel okay for who they are, that I can't. I think this is going to be the opposite of what I wanted. I was feeling like I was ready to love someone. But I think this year will be about being an outsider and feeling lonely, staying on the outside in order to write about it." I've been thinking about the concept of interior and exterior spaces and how they don't exist just in landscapes and cities, plazas and elevators, streets and homes, but in films, books, and bodies. You might think you're getting someone's innermost thoughts when you talk to them, when a narrator in a book or film speaks to you and the fourth wall is broken. Even in your own brain, you think you are fully inside of it. But the truth is complex and takes many forms, and sometimes the truth seems like a lie, but it may really be the truth. How do you explain a woman who hasn't found that one sexual orientation can define her identity? How do you explain a gay-seeming boy who uses people to survive? Some lies need to be torn down. Some lies look like truth. Some truths are multifaceted, and sometimes truth slowly reveals itself as the words are yet to be formed. Thank you.
Our next reader and panelist is Armen Ohanyan, pen name Armen Hayastansi or Armen of Armenia. Armen is a fiction writer, essayist, and literary translator. He holds a bachelor's degree in philosophy from Yerevan State University and the graduate certificate in translation from American University of Armenia. He's the author of the story collection The Return of Kikos and the trilogy of novels Mommyland. He is a board member of HRH Yerevan, TIAC, and Political Dialogue NGO. He has been the president of PEN Armenia since 2017. Please give a warm welcome to Armen Ohanyan.
Please unmute Armen.
Okay. Can you hear me? Oh, thank you. Because I'm the only author joining this event from Yerevan, I thought it might be nice to hear some Armenian. So I'll read a fragment from Mommyland about one of the main characters, Erna, who is a lesbian, lonely lesbian in her early 40s. Erna. Հազար ու մի ագիտակ պատտվում էր մոլորակը միայնակ։ 7, 8, 9, 10 գնդակն ընկավ դարպասը։ Ինքը մոր փորում պսլիկ պտուտակ էր, իսկ հոր գլխում ապագա դարպասապա, որովհետև Արարատը թիմ սար էր, ֆուտբոլը սիրված խաղ էր, կյանքը պատտվողանի աշխարհն ավտոճանապարհ էր։ Մենք 2-3 մեքենան բերեք, որ ճաշիկն ուտի։ Ինքը ճստիկ ունի պստիկ, մի ապերիկ, հայրիկ ունի, մեկ էլ մայրիկ, մեկը դզով փչող փրկիչ, մյուսը փողթափող դահիճ։ Շենքի բակում հոր կառուցած ավտոտնակում իր խաղալիք ավտոներն է քանդում սարքում, տիկնիկներին վրան տնկում, անհոգ քշու ուրախ ձայնում։ Դրամ բմ բիբի բիբի, մայրը կանչում է։ Աղջի տուն արի, ինքը լեզվին է տալիս, աղջի դու ես, չեմ գալիս, լավ էլ գիտի, որ տուն գնա հացի տեղակ քոթակ ուտի, 4, 5, 6, խաղալիքը կոտրվեց, ուղարկեցին մանկապարտեզ, որ խելքի գա, բայց ոչ լոտեց, ամեն անից դարսավանեց կոչլոտ գլխին, որ նա գուցվեց մորաներ երցնքների մեջ, ձենը գցեց աշխարհով մեկ, միջև հայրը վրա հասավ, ընտանեկան այդ կտանքի վերջը տվեց, քաչալացրեց, աղջին դու ես, ես տղա եմ, հորս տղա եմ, ասաց ինքն իրեն, երբ մեքենայի հայրում տեսավ, պեկին նստած քաչալ պեկին։ Դպրոց գնաց, նույնը մնաց, ֆիզկուլտը 5 մնացածը ձգած 3, ծնողական ժողովներին եղբորը գովում են իրեն փնովում։ Ուսմասվարը չի զլանում ամեն անգամ նույն բառերով, յուր զարմանքը բարձրաձայնեց։ Մի տնից ու այսքան տարբեր, ուղղակի հակապատկեր։ Իր պետքն էլ չի, ուշքու միտքը ոչ դասերն են, ոչ էլ սերը, մեքենան է ու վարելը, առանց ջանքի, առանց ցանքի, առանց հուսքի ու խախանքի։ Հետո 88-ներ։ Հայրը գնաց ցույցի, որ ապացուցի, Ղարաբաղը մերն է, երկրի կոմիտեի տղաների ձեռն է։ Մայրը թարսվեց, ճիշտ է ասում են մարդը, Ղարաբաղը ոչեբը չի, որ հանի տա։ Հայրն առարկեց, արի մարդ կանք, ժողովուրդը մի մարդու պես հուպ կտա, Լենին, պարտիա, Գորբաչովի ուլ կտա։ Ու մի օր էլ 8-ի բնել դասից փախավ օպերա, որովհետև ճամփեքը բոլոր, ուղիղ թե բոլոր, նույն տեղն էին տանում։ Օպերա, ընճաշը դիրթով եռա, վայ մամա ջան ես մեռա, դիբուդի չկերա, ծիծաղում էին աղջիկները, իսկ ինքը լուր մտամոլոր հետևում էր Սվարթքունդին, երբ կոնքերը կլորացավ, ոնց կրծքերը փարթավացավ, ինչու դարձան ցանկալի տիկնիկները տաղտալի, օրորոտը մերն է, բայց թուրքերի ձեռն է, ելնեմ սարի գագաթին, թքեմ թուրքի ճակատին, կանկարկում էին տղաները, երբ կոշտացան ձայները, ոնց բուսնեցին բեղերը, ինչու դարձան նախանձելի տղաները անտանելի։ Ու այդ օրվանից ինքը հերթով սիրահարվեց դասարանի բոլոր աղջիկներին, ուզեց վարել, բայց չգիտի ինչպես վարվել։ Աղջիկն էլ հոմեքենա չի, իսկ բանալին նրա սրտի հորջևը չի, որ հանի տա։ Ու անիվը պտույտ գործեց, Արարատը հուպ տվեց, դինամոին պես է կրկին կուլ տվեց, երկինքն անխախ է, հայրը ուրախ է, մայրը մտահոգ, եղբորը մի կերպ բանակից փախցրել տնից հեռու անշարժ մի տեղ, սովորելու է ուղարկել։ Իր պետքն էլ չի, մեքենան կա, բենզին չկա, մարդկոցը հայր կա ու կա, ավտոտնակը դարձրել է դիսկոտեկա, թաղի սիրուն աղջիկներին հավաքել է ցկցկալու, դում, Եվ բենզին ճարվեց, գլուխ չպահեց, ինչ արեց չարեց, վարելով արեց, տարին մեկ մեքենա փոխեց օրու մեջ սիրած, դեպի սիրտ ծանող ճամփեքով բոլոր, ուղիղ թե բոլոր, քիչ-քիչ վարժվեց, ու հիմա արդեն ազատ է վարել իր ուզած կյանքը, մեկ էլ հանկարծ գլխապտույտ մի շրջադարձ։ Հայրը կրկին գնաց ցույցի, որ ինքն իրեն ապացուցի, Հայաստանը մեր է, երկրի ղեկը ժողովրդի ձեռն է, մայրը ցարսվեց, որտեղ տղես ընդեղ էլ ես, այստեղ ինչ կա, վերկաց գնանք Ամերիկա, Հայրն առարկեց, արի մարդ կանք, հաղթելու ենք, ու բարձրախոսը զիլ կանչեց, վաղագարուն եմ ենք, հաղթելու ենք, որ տուն դառնանք, դե մարտին, եկ մարտի մեկին գարուն չեկար, ու անիվը սրնուց ընկավ։ Տոմսերն արել, տունը տեղը ծախել են, կահկարասին ավտոտնակում դարսել են, ճամպրուկներն են կապում, իսկին քլու, մտամոլոր հետևում է, երբ ոնց է, ինչու պայթեց, ասես աչքի առաջ 1001 մեքենա պայթեց, ու որ պարզորոշ ութուն տեսավ, դիմապակի, թափուկախոց, ոտնակ, բռնակ ու պահունակ, բեռնախցի, փոխանցման տուփ ու թափարգել, մխոց, վրանղեկ, նստարան, անիվները, ինչ եղան, գլորվում են անիվները, տանող, տարվող, ղեկավարվող, սղնիներից դուրս են թռչում ու վառվելով, հեռանում են ճամփեքով բոլոր, ուղիղ թե բոլոր, դուք գնացեք, ես մնում եմ։ Արարատը սիրուն սար է, վազանցումը խաղուբար է, կյանքը պտտվող անիվ աշխարհն ավտոճանապարհ է, երրորդ, երինը, ուր է սրատակինը, 40-ի մատույցներում մի կարևոր մաս է փնտրում, առանց որի չի պտտում իր անիվը, ոչինչ անսակ չի, ամեն ինչ տեղն է, պտտադարձյակը, դողը, պոմպը, խցողակը, բականքային տափողակը, կիսալիսերը, բույթը, մանեկ, անվակունդը, տարալցման փականը, արգելակման գլանը, լծակը եւ թմբուկը, հովակապտուկը, բայց չգիտի ինչպես վարել, անկարող է կրկին վարել, առանց ջանքի, առանց ցանքի, առանց հունքի ու քախանքի, ու մենակ, հազարու միակի տակ, պտտվում է մոլորակը միայն։ Thank you.
Merci, Shnohagalachiun, Armen. Thank you. Our next reader and panelist is Kamee Abrahamian. Kamee is a supreme hyphenate who arrives in the world today as an interdisciplinary writer, artist, producer, performer, organizer, and a non-binary queer feminist caregiver. They grew up in an immigrant suburb of Toronto and was born into an Armenian family displaced from the Swana, Southwest Asia, North African region. Kamee's work is steeped with relational and generative practices oriented towards ancestral reclamation, visionary fiction, and diasporic futurism. They hold a BFA/BA in Film and Political Science from Concordia University, an MA in Expressive Art Therapy from the European Graduate Institute, and a PhD in Community Liberation, Indigenous, and Eco-Psychologies from Pacific Graduate Institute. Kamee has published plays, literary and academic writing, while organizing and presenting films, artwork, stage performances, and workshops internationally. Recent projects include Ensouled, Bok Danil, Transmission, and Dear Armen. They currently work both with freelance and collaboratively with various collectives and ad hoc groups, and they are the Arts and Creative Expression Tactic Lead at a global feminist movement support organization called AWID. Please give a warm welcome to Kamee.
Thank you, J.P. What's up, everybody? I'm going to read a piece called Queer Motherhood is Speculative Fiction. I wrote it when I perhaps thought, or maybe did, have brain damage from being really sleep deprived as a new mother. I sit on a rug my grandfather passed down to me after Sana was born. It is red, yellow, black. Sana is 9 months old now. They are naked, teething, miserable. Today has been miserable. Earlier this morning, I told my partner, I'm going to get some herbs from the garden. It had just rained, and when I reached the rosemary bush, I stopped, looked at the scissors in my hands, and wondered if they were sharp enough to cut through vein. I thought crying might help, but milk poured out of my eyes and onto the wet grass, disappearing into the earth. This rug is red, yellow, black, old. It is magic. This is a motherfucking magic carpet. It is here on this carpet, sitting cross-legged with one hand hovering behind Sana, ready to catch their fall, when the clearest thought since my first sleepless night arrived in my mind. Queer motherhood is speculative fiction. When they pushed their way into this world, a portal ripped my body open and remained that way for many months. During labor, the midwife kept measuring the size of this opening. As the numbers increased, I became worried that this portal would sever waist from hips, a magic trick gone wrong. There was a period of silence and bliss in which my understanding of where the room ended and where my body began vanished entirely, followed by convulsions and exorcism. Then she said, 10 centimeters, and I knew it was done growing. My vision shattered into dust, just as Sana released their first song onto my breast, a screeching symphony that still echoes through waist and hips. All my sense of self and being writhed in a prison of ever-stretching flesh from the moment they chose me as womb and caretaker. Yes, it was a choice, one made from whatever place that non-beings exist, and look down at us like a litter of kittens and say, "Oh, look, that one squealing in the corner. She's cute. I'll take her." I am enslaved to this new creature, who is to become like me, a breathing, living being also, who I am meant to care for and chaperone through this temporal existence. I am a bodyguard. I am a risk assessment analyst. I scan their surroundings and evaluate possibilities of harm. I am the Terminator. I would die for them. I have died for them in other lives that I'm privy to since the portal opened. In my dreams, I speak to the mothers who died and the mothers who lost them, who will lose them. Many mothers kiss my eyes and I kiss theirs. In my nightmares, Sana is screaming ferociously, covered in blood, falling into endless pits, getting shot, being ripped out of my arms. Every time they come close to death, which feels as frequent as blinking, I feel the pain of a mourning mother version of me from another timeline. I imagine their death frequently, drawn to what I now fear the most. They are mostly horrific, violent deaths that come to me in waves or out of the blue. There is a gallery, no, a mosaic of images of Sana's demise in the depths of my mind that form a larger image even more dreadful than 1,000 deaths. The image is unclear, a Gaussian blur, but I can feel it looming over me like a colossal statue of a nameless saint with secrets, laughing hysterically and crying blood tears. They mix with my milk tears. I have not bled in 18 months. Blood did not make me a woman. History made me a woman. And now I am woman no more. The skin of a mother slipped onto me in the night while I slept in a room with no light, and now I crack, crumble, snap under the pressure of feminized labor. And yet becoming pregnant has been the most queerest experience for me to date. Being brown and queer was a pull in opposite directions, a living in between two worlds. Becoming a mother was the Big Bang, not a theory, but very fucking real. It fragmented my being and orientation into infinite shrapnel. My hope was to elaborate on this here, but this is not actually possible. Elaboration requires a stretch of time to contemplate, dig deep, a sitting with. I have no moments. I have a baby. Motherhood, an alien invasion of every aspect of my life, my body, my relationships. It's a good day if they wake me up with wet kisses. It's a good day if I remember to ask my partner about his day. It's a good day if I remember to breathe. Breathing deeply, taking one full breath in and exhaling one full breath out without interruption or distraction is an act from a past life. Thinking is a luxury. I only have time to act. I am a body. I am outside my body. Motherhood is an out-of-body experience. I observe Sana. They observe me. I slip into their eyes. My eyes are not mine. They are my mother's and her mother's and hers and hers and hers. This rug is red, yellow, black, old. It is magic, and it is hers. This magic is hers, theirs, ours. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamee. Our next reader and panelist is Michael Barakiva. Michael is an Armenian Israeli American who lives in New York City with his husband. His young adult novels, One Man Guy, and its standalone sequel, Hold My Hand, are the first young adult novels featuring an Armenian protagonist and a queer Armenian protagonist. His upcoming young adult novel, These Precious Stones, FSG 2022, is a contemporary epic fantasy featuring a group of queer international teens tasked with saving the world. He is also the founder and creative director of Novel Readings, a company that uses new play development tools to aid novelists to develop their work and hosts live readings for companies designed to further social justice and equity, diversity, inclusivity causes. Please give a warm welcome to Michael Barakiva.
Hi everybody. Thank you so much for having me and us. What an extraordinary way to spend a Saturday afternoon for me here in New York City. I'm primarily a theater director and producer. I've got a theater company in New York City called the Upstart Preachers. Our first event was a 13-hour adaptation of Paradise Lost with 2 full meals that we cooked entirely free. And if that is not the most Armenian thing I've ever heard, I don't know what is. And we continue to, we actually have an event this weekend of Tony Kushner's adaptation of Corneille's The Illusion, which we're doing on a board member's roof in Midtown, socially distanced and safe. My first young adult novel is One Man Guy, and I'll be doing a reading from its standalone sequel, which is Hold My Hand, and they both feature, as J.P. was kind enough to say, a queer teenage Armenian protagonist. Okay. Kissing Ethan. Kissing Ethan rocked. Kissing Ethan was like taking a rocket to outer space, floating in zero gravity, and marveling at the incomprehensible beauty of the creations of the universe. Kissing Ethan was sweet like the last piece of baklava, drenched in honey, snatched from the bottom of the box. Kissing Ethan was the answer to an unasked prayer. And then there was being kissed by Ethan. Being kissed by Ethan was not the same as kissing him. Being kissed by Ethan was rapture, surrender. Being kissed was surfing a wave of joy, unpredictable, uncontrollable, that could break any moment and send you tumbling, an endless series of surprises. Being kissed by Ethan was endorphins kicking in 2 hours into a tennis match, transforming pain into euphoria. It was being on a ship in a violent storm, hoping you wouldn't be torn apart as the ocean churned beneath you. It was feeling like your skin, your very body would explode because it couldn't possibly contain all the joy pulsing through it. Alec brought Ethan's face back up to his own. He kissed Ethan back. Kissing Ethan was safer than being kissed by him. Whoa. Alec pulled away, gasping for air, as if he'd just edged out a victory in the tiebreaker of the 5-set tennis match full of baseline strokes, cross-court slams, and net game saves. Come on, Ethan purred. We're just getting started. Hundreds of half-naked men stared at Alec from the images Ethan had plastered around his room, cut from magazine ads, a kaleidoscope homage to homoeroticism. The effect was dizzying as wall and ceiling and floor merged seemingly seamlessly with sculpted torsos and abs and chests and calves. I had promised my mom I'd help get ready for Thanksgiving. Alec retrieved his bright purple shirt with plaid gray details from the chair by Ethan's desk, the only piece of furniture in the room other than the bed where Ethan remained. I hate to point out the obvious, but Thanksgiving isn't for another week, Ethan rolled over. Or is this some weird Armenian thing like Christmas that you celebrate at a different time than everyone else in the whole freaking world? We Armenians celebrate Thanksgiving just like everyone else, thank you very much. Although, did you know that Canadian Thanksgiving is celebrated on the second Monday in October? No, I did not know that. Ethan sat up, surrendering to Alec's departure. You're going to your grandma's for Thanksgiving, right? That was the plan. But then Nana twisted her ankle, so she decided she wasn't up to hosting Thanksgiving. I will try to save you the political saga that ensued as my dad and his 2 siblings negotiated who would assume the mantle. But suffice to say, it involved 3 instances of blackmail, 2 of coercion, the reemergence of a fight from 20 years ago when my dad and his older sister were in college and had something to do with a cat, tears, apologies, more tears, and a complicated negotiation involving a credenza that both my dad and his younger brother would like once Nana finally passes to the next world. We're talking backroom deals that would almost put 45's presidential administration to shame. And this is you sparing me the saga? Alec nodded. The long and short of it is that we will be hosting Thanksgiving this year, so yes, 7 days is barely enough time to prepare. My mom took the week off from the UN, the entire week, because she knows that hosting her in-laws is a prime opportunity for Nana to judge her housekeeping, cooking, and child rearing. Ethan rolled over on his back, defeated. Are all Armenian families this complicated? From what I hear, we're on the simpler side. My mom has 6 siblings who all live in the same town in South California. I'm amazed they haven't had a Romeo and Juliet style feud spring up there. Alec finished tying his shoes. I'll see you soon, okay? Wilt thou leave me so unsatisfied? Ethan asked, eyes batting innocence from the bed. What satisfaction canst thou expect? Alec flirted back. See, I can quote Romeo and Juliet too, but I'm still out of here. Have you thought about it? Alec asked. Thought about what? Do you want to do it? Ethan asked. Do what? You know, have sex. And there it was, the question, hovering between them like an enemy drone, threatening to destroy everything beautiful they had built. I think, Alex stammered, pulling away abruptly, groping for words that weren't there. Not yet. That's cool. Ethan kissed Alec again, quickly, lovingly, but underneath it, Alec could feel Ethan's disappointment lingering the rest of the night, tainting their time, like an otherwise perfect dish spoiled by a single rotten ingredient. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Our next reader and panelist is Arlene Avakian. Professor Emeritus Arlene Avakian is a founder and former chair of Women, Gender, Sexuality Studies at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Her areas of interest include social constructions of identities through an intersectional lens, which she has explored through autobiography and memory studies, as well as whiteness and food studies. Her recent writing has been published in the anthologies Gendered Wars, Gendered Memories, and Imagining Our Foremothers, Memory and Evidence of Women Victims and Survivors of the Armenian Genocide. Her memoir, Lion Woman's Legacy, an Armenian American memoir, was the first published by an Armenian American woman and the first published by an Armenian American woman identifying as lesbian. Please give a warm welcome to Professor Avakian.
Arlene, you need to unmute.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, for organizing this. You'll see from the reading how much it means to me. I'll be reading from the afterword to the Turkish translation of Lion Woman's Legacy that was published in 2019 in Istanbul. It focuses on some of the major events in my life that relate to the themes of the memoir after its original publication in 1992. Part of that story is my trips to Turkey and how the relationships I formed there opened a new world for me. This translation never would have happened without my dear friends and colleagues in Turkey advocating for the publication. It all began with an email from someone named Ayşegül Altini, asking me to present at the Hrant Dink workshop on gender and ethnicity in the former Ottoman lands. I was more than dubious and almost deleted the email, but I did not. And I did make that first trip to Istanbul in 2009, the first of 8 over the next years. And ever since that first trip, I've been working on various projects with my Turkish friends and colleagues. Among them is Fethi Çetin, whose grandmother, Heranush, was an 8-year-old child on a death march with her mother and grandmother, and a gendarme basically kidnapped her and took him to his home. Fethi's amazing book about Heranush, my grandmother, has been translated into 12 languages. Because we share politics, we've been able to work closely together to give talks, publish papers, and are in the final stages of a book of conversations among Aisha, Fethi, and myself. The book is called Mirroring Lives, and it is not a work of reconciliation, but an exploration of race, class, gender, and sexuality from my different positionalities and generations. We call each other queers. What I am reading now is only a small part of the afterword, which is unfortunately not available in English. I could not have imagined 25 years ago that an Armenian press in Istanbul would publish a Turkish translation of Lion Woman's Legacy. After my grandmother, Elmas Tutuyan, told me what she experienced in Kastamonu in 1915, she sat back, looked at me in the eyes, and told me, quote, "Tell the world," unquote. I did not want to tell anyone. Telling that story or even acknowledging it as part of my family history, I believe, would mark me as more of an outsider than I already felt in the United States. I told no one, not even my family, what she had shared with me, which was not strange since no one in my family ever talked about the genocide. Her story went underground for decades. As much as I resisted making her story mine when I was growing up, by the time I was in my 30s, I accepted the centrality of Elmas's story to my life. When Lion Woman's Legacy was published in 1992, I finally fulfilled my grandmother's charge to tell her story to the world. The road that story and I have traveled over the last 25 years has been circuitous, but now, to my great amazement and gratification, Elmas's story is being told in the country of her birth and her travail. Elmas's story has come home. For most of my young adulthood, I ran from my ethnicity and my family. I now know that the trauma my family suffered, which was unspoken and unacknowledged by them and the world, was passed down to me, and I passed it down to my children. But I didn't know any of that until many years later. After Legacy was published, a young woman approached me about organizing a group for Armenian feminists to talk about our lives. I was wary, but agreed to meet with her to help her plan the meeting. Wanting the agenda to be shaped by the women who attended, we decided that we would begin by asking them why they had come and what they wanted from the group. By word of mouth, a name here, another there, we collected a critical mass and sent an invitation to a meeting for progressive, anti-racist Armenian feminists to come together for a day-long meeting to talk about our lives. On the 2-hour drive from my home in Western Massachusetts to Cambridge, I thought about what I would say. I was both excited and fearful, anxious to get to the meeting and simultaneously wondering what in the world I thought I could get from a gathering of Armenian women. We moved around the circle, going slowly from woman to woman, and I felt tears well up as I heard my own life experiences echoed in the voices of the other women in the room. The pain of being girls in families where brothers were favored, rage at being limited and controlled because we were females, frustration at the political conservatism in our families and communities, isolation resulting from fleeing families in order to be able to breathe, and lurking behind it all, the unspeakable spoken, the 1915 genocide of Armenians in Turkey that had shaped our lives, whether or not our ancestors had actually been killed. As each woman's sharing of herself became deeper and the listening more profound, the space we were creating enveloped us, nurtured us, and began to touch the longings for connections we had dared not utter. One woman spoke of other richness in her life, her friends, her intimate relationship, her research, scholarship, and teaching. Yet, she said, she had felt an emptiness, a hole in her psyche, a place that the voices she heard in that space we created were filling. We were almost around the circle when a woman introduced herself and turned on a light in the deep recesses of my psyche. My name is Mara Kalostyan. It's not really her name. And as an Armenian lesbian, I'm happy to be here. My heart began to pound. A lesbian? She said, as an Armenian lesbian. Incredibly, in all my thoughts about what this meeting might mean, I had not once considered my sexuality, although I had been out for many years. Now I wanted to break into the circle and shout, me too. I'm an Armenian lesbian too. It was not the lesbian part that was so earth-shattering. It was the connection to being Armenian. We were able to inhabit all of ourselves through these day-long, thrice-yearly meetings. We heard each other, we held each other, we cried and laughed together. I was able to put my Armenian American self in the center of my identity, along with gender, race, class, and finally, sexuality. So you can see that even the idea of a queer Armenian panel means a lot to me. And I'm very happy to say that the Turkish edition of Legacy is being pretty widely read and has had some terrific reviews. I look forward to the time when I can have a proper launch in Istanbul.
Thank you, Arlene. So segueing now to our conversation, which I'm very excited to do, I think I'm going to pose the first question to Nancy, if you're all right with that. And it'll be for the panel, but I'll start with you, Nancy. There is your identity of yourself as a writer. I'm curious, though, that as a queer Armenian writer, what has your experience been like?
You know, it's really been mixed. I would say when I first started writing, it was really so much that I couldn't even put into words. And so when I grew up in Massachusetts, when I moved to Los Angeles and became a part of a circle of multicultural queer artists and writers, I felt like I had a space to write about all that had been silenced of being queer and within my Armenian family, but also questions about race, of who Armenians were racially, just all the things that my family didn't talk about. And I think, I didn't expect that this work would be heard by the Armenian community. And over the years, I've been pulled into it more and more by various people. And it's, my experience of it has grown from feeling isolated to feeling pulled in more and more, to the point that now here we are with a queer Armenian literature.
Kamee, I'd like to pose the question to you as well, particularly considering your interdisciplinary. I mean, you work in a lot of different genres. So I'm curious what that experience of being a queer Armenian writer and artist has been like for you. Is Kamee still with us?
Sorry, I'm back. Can you repeat that? I had to step away for a second.
No worries. I'm curious how your experience has been. You're an interdisciplinary artist, right? Writer and playwright or filmmaker. So I'm curious how your experiences have been as a queer Armenian writer.
It's mostly been fine. I think as an interdisciplinary artist, I've had many different avenues to sort of insert myself in different communities and situations. I definitely did not, at the beginning, there was maybe a little bit of stickiness around it, me feeling not accepted by my community because I was identified as queer, etc. But I think a lot of that was mostly internalized stuff from my earlier years, because in my 20s, I was actually, I didn't have too many problems with it. In fact, I felt really accepted by my local community in Toronto. I did your Armen there, and I remember my creative partner Lee and I both went to Armenian school there, and we thought, like, what the fuck are we doing, putting on this like queer ass play at Agum, where we grew up, like within the walls of like where we, used to like spend recess and stuff like that. And so, it ended up being okay. But I also think it's because we were pretty subversive with the way that we described our work. So we were kind of like often tricking people into coming to see queer shit or to read queer shit, and like with the help of allies that we were working with that would like invite us and host us, right? There's like, maybe instead of using the word erotic performance, just put experimental, like get them to come and then blow their minds. And so that's been my tactic for the large part. But I've also felt quite connected with other like diasporic queer Swana communities in Canada and in the US. So that's been a pretty incredible experience to build community through that. So I would say for the large part, it's been okay. I'm happy also now just being known as like an Armenian artist and writer. I think we've talked about this before, JP.
Yeah, that's going to be one
like,
of our
I don't just write
prompts.
about queerness, right? Like I don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Michael, I'm curious. So you kind of got a foot in both worlds, right? As a novelist and as a playwright working in the theater. So I'm curious how this experience of being a queer Armenian writer has been for you.
Well, the issue, I think for me, because I'm half Israeli and half Armenian, I was born in Israel, I grew up in the States, all of those issues have sort of swirled together for me. And one of the things that I think is extraordinary about the moment we're living in is that we're really looking at intersectionality and what that means. We moved to the States from Haifa when I was 6. I grew up in the suburbs of New Jersey, which were much scarier and more dangerous than Israel. And the book originally, One Man Guy, was originally called The Suburbs Suck. So, which is like what you need to know about my suburban experience, childhood. And so I think there's something about, Arthur, are you waving? Are you also suburban New Jersey?
Oh. No, I'm actually in California. I saw that there was a child on the call with Kamee, and I was just.
Oh, I see. Oh yes, look at that beauty. Look at that angel. Most children respond that way to me. So there's something about, being the child of two genocides, one acknowledged, one until very recently unacknowledged, one, with nation states that came into emergence both in the last few decades, and it's interesting to hear, my grandmother was an infant when her parents sort of, went on the march and got her out of Turkey. And she never spoke about the genocide. But my mother brought us up. It was like the family lore. And I remember really vividly the article from the New York Times about mass killings in 1913. It must have been, a microfiche or a photocopy or something that was on our refrigerator door for the entirety of my childhood. So we grew up with a really keen sense of it, but at the same time, my mother was quite liberal, and she left the Armenian church when we came to the States. She converted to Lutheranism and is now sort of a proud agnostic. So we didn't grow up under the deeply oppressive church. And when I was doing the research for Hold My Hand, which is a lot about the protagonists coming out and how to navigate his church experience with that, like the Catholic Church, the church is just so appalling on so many ways that you just sort of have to wonder how the institution, what deep need the institution is functioning, serving everybody, all of these religions, to allow something that is so problematic and destructive to continue to exist with such power.
Thank you, Michael. Arlene, I'd like you to join in the conversation here, particularly because your memoir was out front, if you will. Your memoir was published in 1992, and as far as I'm aware, in terms of published books, it wasn't until Nancy's Princess Freak and Nancy's Me As Her Again, which were in the aughts, early 2000s. So what was your experience like as a queer Armenian writer?
It's easy to say. I was ignored both by feminists and Armenians, institutionally. I heard from Armenian women literally all over the world saying, "You've written my story, thank you so much." The writing of the memoir was actually suggested to me by dear friends who were also on my doctoral committee, who were African American. John Etta Cole, who was then in the anthropology department, but with strong connections to Afro-Am, and John Bracey, who was in Afro-Am at UMass. Because they knew that I had a story kind of about whiteness and ethnicity to tell. And I am, as an Armenian in this country, I consider myself white. I do not consider myself a person of color. So it was an academic work. I did a lot of research. I had a big foreword, a big afterword about the literature. And what I was trying to do was put race and ethnicity in the center of gender. That was my project. So I was very critical of feminists. So the book almost didn't get published by the feminist press, although UMass Press said, "We'll publish this. We love it." But from the institutions, Armenian institutions, I basically was ignored. AWA, which some of you may have heard of, Armenian International Women's Association, I was on the founding board of that for a little while. They couldn't say feminist with a mouthful at that time. They did a conference. One of their first conferences was at Wellesley, and it was on Armenian women's identity. They did not ask me to read. my book was out, the first one. And so I said I would put in I would do a workshop, and they changed my workshop because it wasn't what they wanted. So I didn't fit in there, and feminists didn't. But for me, the book accomplished what I wanted to do. And the irony of it is that I was invited to Turkey because of Lion Woman's Legacy. Aisha Altani, who invited me to present at that conference, had read Lion Woman's Legacy, and that's why she invited me, and I was the first person to speak at that conference. So with my Turkish friends, individually, it was recognized, but then they were very insistent to get it published, and they did.
That raises, I think, an interesting question of how your work is received. Armen, I'd be curious how your work has been received in Yerevan and Armenia at large. Is Armen still with us? Oh.
Okay, I'm constantly having problem with unmuting myself. So what was the question?
I statement there about how her work was being received. I'm curious how your work was received in Yerevan and Armenia at large.
Okay, it was warmly received by the LGBT community, let's say, a small community, but for general public, it's more controversial. But it was a choice. In case of contemporary Armenian-based queer author, it's always a hard choice. Of course, there's this strong feeling of mission or duty or responsibility, whatever. But by choosing to write on these tabooed subjects from the very beginning, you know that you will not be a popular author. Most probably you'll be losing your readership. It's more about the freedom to fail. In a way, you are consciously choosing the path of a loser, let's say, to make it possible for your community to heal, uprise, overcome phobias, whatever. I wouldn't say it's a pure sacrifice, but it's all about taking risks, that's for sure. Because in Armenia, until now, it's deadly dangerous to be openly gay, blah, blah, blah. You know the situation. So I can say that it was warmly received from a LGBT community in Armenia, and I'm still getting some feedbacks almost every day. But that's all. Generally, I don't think that I've changed the Armenian world with this trilogy, let's say. It's just, I did it just for myself, first of all, and for my people, let's say, for my community.
Thank you. Michael, I'll pose the same question to you, particularly because you are like the only Armenian and Armenian Israeli writing young adult work. And so, I could see that maybe being warmly received or maybe not warmly received. So I'd be curious about your experiences.
I feel pretty confident that I'm the only Armenian, Israeli, American young adult queer writer. I feel pretty confident about that. I really got that niche covered. It's so funny. I mean, I haven't spent a lot of time in LA, but I feel like I've got to give out a shout out to Arno's bookstore, which is how you found the book the first time. Is that right, JP?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a real bookstore.
Yeah. And a friend put us in touch, and I remember somebody else saying to me, I was like, oh, I'm doing a reading at an Armenian bookstore in LA, and a friend went to an Armenian bookstore in LA and was like, oh, there's this book about, a gay Armenian teenager, and I guess it was the other Armenian bookstore in LA that was not very excited about this topic, because they were like, we do not carry books with that kind of subject matter, they said, clutching their pearls aghast. So the reception has been, it's been all over the place. It's funny. For me, it's funny because the book is, as the covers make really clear, the book is marketed as an M4M, a same-sex young adult romance. But my friends who read it, and a lot of the people who have written about it on Goodreads say, oh, it's as much of an Armenian story as it is a same-sex teenage falling in love story. The thing that is so interesting to me in hearing you introduce this wonderful panel, JP, is how many of us are firsts, not just in the LGBTQ world, but in the Armenian world. Like the fact that Arlene is the first Armenian woman to have published a memoir in this country, period, orientation regardless, that's an extraordinary thing. And it's such an interesting way to see to think about why so many of the pioneers in our field are also LGBTQ.
That's true. Kamee, you were saying that earlier that you'd use like experimental as opposed to erotic, right? To kind of bring folks in. After that, I mean, how would that look? Like, how was the work received within the Armenian community? Like, you got them in there and they were there, then how did things kind of play out afterwards?
I think that for the first time in my life, I actually appreciated that most Armenians won't say shit to your face. Because honestly, no one actually said anything. And that was fine, because I just pretended like that everything was okay and no one was mad about it. But like obviously my higher self knows that there's likely some kind of scandal happening without me knowing. But I feel like when you're being backed in a particular way, it's almost to say something. You know what I mean? Like no one, and I feel like I feel pretty lucky. My parents are pretty like incredibly supportive and on a bunch of different levels in their own way. So I think I'm trying to think. I honestly could have just blocked stuff out of my head, but it was fine. For sure, there were some like aghast faces in the audience, but for the most part, people have always known who I was in my community. Like I can't say if I'm in like LA or in other parts of the world, people have always known who I am. So I think if they saw my name on like a flyer for something, they're going to be like, oh, this is going to be racy. You know what I mean? But the funny thing is, Dear Armen, we did for the first time ever in Yerevan. And an amazing thing that happened was we did it at the club. There's like, that if folks are familiar, there's that back room, that like tea room. And at first I was really worried because I was like, okay, I don't know if we're going to be able to pull this off. Like there was nudity and definitely a lot of queerness in the play. But then I did something where I was like, you know what? I'm just not going to say anything. So when I was liaising with the person who was booking us, he also knew not to ask too many questions. I think he knew, like he had a feeling. He took one look at me. I had tattoos and he was just like, I'm gonna book you and then you can do your thing. I'm not gonna be in the room. And I appreciated that. It was this thing of like, you do you, we just stayed in our lanes and it actually worked out okay. So, this is in 2013.
2013. I saw a lot of folks start laughing, Kamee, when you say, that talking behind folks' back. Nancy, and your memoir, Me as Her Again, you you have an introduction that's specifically addressing to folks about that kind of idea of like Armenian gossip. I'm curious how you would respond to that.
How I'd respond to
how your work was being received, and also this concept of you might not get the feedback to your face, to you yourself, that it would be happening like all around you and behind you.
I feel like that was a fear among my family. When I was publishing work in LA in local journals, Hye-Phen Magazine, who is also a IALA board member, saw it and he was kind of steeped in the Armenian community in LA in a way that I wasn't, as someone who just moved there. And that's kind of what I mean by being pulled in, is I didn't know anyone would connect, any Armenian would connect with this work. And I used to do performance art, and this isn't me as her again. There was a lady who kind of loved my performances, and she would come and make a scene every time. And it's almost like kind of what you want, you know, like you almost want that reaction, because when she would say this is garbage and this is trash and you don't know what you're doing, it made people talk, you know, people would respond to that in a way that if she hadn't done that, I don't know if the conversation would have happened. So I don't know, maybe the prologue is some of me as her again, is some kind of attempt to say, even though I say, don't judge us, I don't know, maybe it is kind of a provocation in some way.
Is that woman available for weddings?
I think if I can shift gears, right, as queer Armenian writers, I'm curious then how your work has been received in the queer community. And Michael, I think I might start with you, as I understand it, and just like, I consider myself a collector of books, right? So I'm not like a writer, but my understanding can be like how things get marketed. You were speaking to that earlier, that there can be kind of these boxes, right, that people are put into. So I'm curious on the flip side, Michael, like how is your work received within the queer community?
Well, you know, I think so many of us are writing from the place of the work we wish we had when we had been, in the YA world. The work we wish we had. So the things that were really important to me that I feel like the queer community has really embraced about my book was to write a young adult same-sex story where the coming out was an event, but it wasn't the event. That felt really, really important to me. I think specifically because, you know, my parents were great about my coming out. I came out to them when I was in my early 20s, and my father, I think, was probably homophobic up until the moment that I came out to him. And then you just saw his decision to love his child reprogram himself, you know, and he was in his 60s by then. So it was an extraordinary thing. And although, of course, it is still dangerous to be queer in many places in this country and in this world, I've spent most of my life in theater in the Northeast. So for most of my life, it was not dangerous. And it was really important for me to tell that story because I think there's something about, it's so easy to have stories of minorities center around their tragedy and their violence. And this is something that a lot of my Arabic friends are telling me about theater being made about the Middle East. This is something that a lot of my Black friends are telling me about their own stories. And it's easy to defend that by saying, oh, you know, we're just trying to do what we're seeing in the world. But something pornographic happens about that. And it's really important. You know, our stories are rich and they have a full gamut of experience. And the only trauma porn, exactly. The only queer stories I had growing up were stories of gay bash. My company, Novel Readings, just produced an event that featured a bunch of YA Asian American Pacific Islander voices. And I had a very interesting conversation with one of those novelists where she said, I've only written one kiss in all of my young adult literature. I've only written one kiss. And it felt like a great luxury to me, because the one thing my editor, the amazing Joy Peskin at FSG, Books for Young Readers, the one thing that we knew was that we needed love scenes between the boys. That it was really, and so we were worried that this would knock us out of some libraries, that, just being queer material was going to be dangerous enough, that having, a sex scene, even a PG sex scene, was going to be too much. And so we made the decision to sort of eliminate anything else potentially racy about the book. So there are no drugs, there are no alcohols, there is no cursing. Like, the book is as rated G as possible, so that we sort of put all of our chips in there, because when you're working in a genre that is defined by the sexual orientation of the characters, if you don't represent that orientation, it's like that Will and Grace thing, where it's like, well, who really cares if these are two queer protagonists? Why don't we see them making out with boys or other men, is what I want to know.
To that end, a quick follow-up. Did you have a say in the book color choice of One Man Guide? Because when I read it and then I saw that yellow, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so unabashedly optimistic.
It's so funny. It's so funny. Like, my editor Joy and I, we went to college together, and we've become very dear friends, and we had a totally perfect collaboration. And the only conflict we had was on the cover, because I wanted to be like a dash brighter. I was like, I just wanted to pop, if we're going to go with yellow. And apparently something else I didn't know is that book covers are not supposed to be yellow. It's like, it goes against some publishing thing. But we fell in love with the cover. We knew it was the right cover the moment we saw it. So it's so funny that you ask about that. And it is like literally the only thing that we had a disagreement about was like how bright the yellow should or could be. But it's funny, again, the cover makes people think it might be a middle grade book. And so to answer your question, again, there was like some township in one of the red states that tragically does not border an ocean, like one of those states where it was in middle schools. And then there was this outrage that what is this book doing in a middle school library? And then the liberal parents said, well, we have middle school books about boys and girls who kiss. Why can't we have a middle school book about boys and boys who kiss? And there was sort of like a whole hoopla about it. But unfortunately, it didn't sell as many more copies of the books as I would have liked it to.
Armen, I'm curious how the experience has been for you, publishing in Armenian. How has your work been received by the queer community in Armenia, or the queer community diaspora as well?
Okay, I think I partly already answered to this question. It was warmly accepted in LGBT community of Armenia, let's say. Diaspora is another question, because it should be translated, first of all, because, majority of Armenian diaspora people are not reading, unfortunately, Eastern Armenian. So most of them, they don't even read Western Armenian. It's a big issue. So I can't talk about diaspora, but there is something I would like to say. What is it for me to be queer and Armenian? And let's say, what is there that unites me and Kim Kardashian? It's not genocide, definitely, because my family didn't experience it directly. We are Eastern Armenians. It's not language, though many think that Armenian identity is strongly language-based. But we see that Kim considers herself as Armenian American and doesn't speak any Armenian. And it's not religion. Not all the Armenians are apostolic, followers of Apostolic Armenian Church. There are even Muslim Armenians, like Armenians of Hamsheni in Turkey, etc. So in reality, there is only one discourse that can unite us in Kim Kardashian, let's say, and it's minority discourse. So I think that we are minority of minority, which means that our experiences are even more important these days in this post-war situation, of crucial importance. Many talk about identity crisis, post-war trauma, etc., and reconstructing or rethinking Armenianness in our stories. Even our tactics of survival, I mean queer Armenians' tactics of survival can be extremely exemplary for overcoming current crisis. This is a little bit philosophical note, but I think that it's important.
That's great. It's great. You raise a really important issue of how we think of ourselves as queer and Armenian. Kamee, you describe yourself as a super hyphenate. I'd be curious your thoughts on how you reconcile that as a queer and an Armenian.
Yeah, I guess being queer and Armenian is a part of the many, the hyphenate. I don't really know what else to say about that. Like, I don't know if, I think maybe for a long time I struggled with reconciling it, but I don't see them as being separate anymore. I think that being queer, or I think that being Armenian is in itself a queer experience, you know, or a diasporic Armenian, or whatever it is. Like, I think it's, and I actually might have read that somewhere recently. I should probably refer to it. It might have been in the, someone help me out. It was the Armenian Review. Nancy, your work was in it too.
Queer and Armenian Studies?
Yeah, that's the one. I think I might have read something about that in there. Anyways, yeah, I think that, like, yeah, I used to struggle, like, as I said, I used to struggle with it a lot more, kind of like feeling on the fringes of my own community, of my Armenian community. And then at some point that kind of stopped. It didn't really matter to me anymore. It was kind of like, yeah, I stopped caring so much, I think, in my 30s. At some point, I just really stopped giving a shit. But that could have just be my context and my privilege, right, of coming from a family that is, like, fairly liberal or pretends to be, so they can't say anything, or they pretend like that, you know, they forget that I came out. You know what I mean? So, like, I feel like that's a very privileged situation to be in. I'm also, like, married to a cis man, and I have a child now. So for them, they're like, oh, okay, that part is over. They've moved on. You know, they think of it as, like, they don't, yeah. So it is a bit awkward. It is a bit like a weird thing, because now I feel like before I was, you know, fighting to be accepted, and now I'm fighting to be like, I'm still queer. Like, just because I like had a child, that doesn't make me automatically not, you know what I mean? Because those things, I think, for Armenians are not, they don't, like, necessarily come together. So now it's like this thing of being, like, a queer Armenian mother. So it's like, again, that's where the hyphenate part comes in, where it complicates things a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Nancy, I think that comes up in a lot of your work, doesn't it? About the erasure that can happen either by sexuality or by erasure, or
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's I connect and relate to that I'm still writing about that. I'm still writing about people forgetting that I'm bisexual. Now with my parents who have dementia, it's been interesting to encounter some of their feelings that I think that they held back from before. So sometimes I think, oh, they've forgotten because they have dementia, but then they'll reveal the attitudes that show that, you know, all the stuff they said about how concerned they were about me being queer when I was coming of age. And I thought that was an excuse. I think that the homophobic response had a lot to do with that, when I see how they're able to see me now and to see kind of what the social structures and restrictions that get embedded in our brain, what happens when they loosen up a bit physically, you know. So that's one
Arlene,
thing that I'm trying to that's one way that I feel like the work is coming into a new direction in writing about caregiving as a queer person, as a queer Armenian.
Arlene, I think I'll put this question to you as well before we can transition to our Q&A. How has that journey been for you, navigating and putting together these identities of queer and Armenian? And then has that for you, as Kamee and Nancy were sort of indicating, it transformed as you were going along your life?
Well, things have changed a lot. Things have really changed a lot since I was writing the book in '85. But I came out in Amherst, Massachusetts, a very liberal community. Not to say there wasn't heterosexism, certainly there was. But I think one thing that's different, well, at least that people haven't talked about, I had very, very difficult time with my family. Not about being queer, about being an adult woman, being separate from them, so I basically fled from my family. So I didn't tell them about being queer, but I didn't tell them a lot in my life, so there's that part. And they were not connected to the Armenian community either, although they were not assimilated at all. So I didn't get a real sense of the Armenian community at all. I mean, they went to church like 2 or 3 times a year. Basically, it was family-based interaction. So when the book came out, I had no connection to Armenians except the ones who I was related to, and nobody said a word about the book. Nobody. Extreme silence. They couldn't deal with it. Of course, they knew it had come out, but they couldn't deal with it. And when I was writing it, my mother, and it was my doctoral dissertation, so my mother kept saying, "What is this thing you're writing?" So I didn't expect anything, and mostly for me, it was an academic work, and I got responses in that way. What I didn't get responses, as I said before, was from feminists, because I was so critical of feminists and racism. And the book almost didn't get published because of that. So it hasn't, so again, the irony is that in Turkey, but individuals, wrote to me all the time about how important it was. So to me, it was all gravy because I didn't expect anything from either the queer community or the Armenian community. But things have really changed, We can get married and be in the military now. Isn't that great?
Thank you for that. There's a great question in the chat. I think we have a few minutes for some questions. So if folks in the audience, if you have some questions, you can put them into the chat. If they're for a specific panelist, can you just put that in there so I know who to address the question to? I think this question from Albert is for the panel. Armen mentions the mission and responsibility Armenians feel writers have, understandable perhaps considering the genocide began with their elimination. And Michael says that some Armenians saw his young adult novel as both its own story and an Armenian story. Kamee makes explicit the hyphenation, the link between the two identities. Is there a way, going forward, to be both your own voice and conscience, the voice and conscience of every queer Armenian, but also the voice and conscience of all Armenians? Is the writing already doing this, and it just isn't recognized as such, or is there something left to be done? That's a big question. Nancy, yeah.
I'd like to respond to him.
Oh, Arlene and then Nancy?
No, Nancy was first. Go ahead, Nancy.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like everyone is doing some version of that, of speaking to Armenians. I wanted to say about Me Is Her again, that, it was an attempt to write a queer coming of age and make sense of it with our history of genocide. But one point I was trying to grapple with was this idea of recognition and how much recognition means to Armenians in terms of the genocide, and putting that alongside my story of like wanting and demanding recognition from my family, and then coming to grips with what it means to recognize oneself. And so I feel like that's a queer story that is also an Armenian story, and that's an Armenian story that Armenians can find their own story within of what it means to recognize oneself as an individual, but also a community.
I really have a problem with this kind of question about Armenians or queer people. You know, if we essentialize a community, what we do is erase people who don't fit in to what everybody thinks the community is supposed to be. And I think many of us have suffered from that. I certainly have. So what is Armenian? What is Armenian and what is queer, you know? I mean, Marlene Riggs in the 80s made this wonderful documentary called Black Is and Black Ain't. And this is in every community. Who gets to define what that community is? So I'm writing from my own experience. It might just be my own experience, but other people relate to it. Other people think I'm out of my mind, you know? What is the Armenian community? What is the queer community? Beats me.
Armen, Michael, or Kamee, would you like to take a...
I feel totally comfortable speaking for every queer person, Armenian person, and Israeli person.
Armen or Kamee? I think Armen, are you trying to... There you go.
I was not speaking about general mission or responsibility. I think there was a misunderstanding, and I fully agree. I was talking about this, that nobody can say what is it to be Armenian, what kind of identity is that, because it's not about language, it's not about religion, it's not even about national state, because, you know, we have 2 million here and 8 million, 4 times more in diaspora. And even it's not about genocide, because not all of us are victims or, let's say, the survivors of the genocide experience. So what we can say for 100% that we are minority. So minority discourse is important for us to have a dialogue. But even within us, we have so many communities for so many, you know, it's hard. So I would agree with Arlene. There is only one thing that maybe being Armenian is somehow connected also with the feeling of injustice. But it's another conversation. I don't know if we have time to go on into this.
I think. You know, I was going to say, Olivia, we need that as a panel. That's Yala's next panel there. Kamee, I'll give you the last word if you'd like to answer the question.
Man, I don't think I have much to add other than maybe circling back to the piece around like the multiplicity or the multifariousness of being all the things at once, you know, like I said earlier, I don't necessarily want to go on the rest of my life being identified as a queer writer or a queer Armenian writer, you know, like I feel like I write about a lot of different things. I make art about a lot of different things. And of course, at the center of it's being drawn from my experiences as a queer feminist, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, that is my worldview, right? But I don't necessarily feel like I need to be identified as such for the rest of my life because, you know, it's kind of like that catch-22 of like, I you know, it's important to have these spaces. It's important to belong to these communities. Absolutely. Like I joke around with my friends and I say, when I meet an Armenian, you know, outside of the Armenian community, it's like, oh, we're family. But to meet another queer Armenian is like, it's like a minority within a minority. Like it's really special, you know? So I think that there's something beautiful about that, and that's great. but I also feel like I connect with a lot of other like queer diasporic peoples or other queer people of color, etc. I think that there's a lot of points of connection across experiences, like shared and differing struggles. And I think it's important to honor that as well, right? For solidarity's sake.
Thank you. I want to be mindful of time. So we said the event was going to go 90 minutes. It's past that time. We do have two pretty good and big questions in the chat. So I'm not sure if we want to continue. I want to be mindful of the panelists' time and how much they've already given us so far. So I will look to Olivia and the panelists if we want to keep going, or if...
We have reached 90 minutes, so those of you who have to go, please do go. But I would love to ask these two questions, especially because, Diana, I know that in France, everything is, my daughter's learning French and everything is gendered. And I mean, the couch is gendered, the computer's gendered. So it just takes, anyway, yes. So if you have to go, please do. But JP, if you'd like to read Diana's question and then Armen's.
Yes, let me scroll up so I can get the whole. So from Diana, I'm listening together with my friend in France, and an observation was made here in France. Who is considered queer is about the blurring of gender, that is, not being able to pass in the cis world. However, in this conversation, queerness is being connected pretty much solely to sexuality, which may not be seen visibly. So we wonder if there have been experiences regarding the inability to pass in terms of one's gender that has been influential in anyone's works and regarding their communities. In addition, why is that queerness here? Why is it that queerness here is being connected mostly to sexuality? And I think I'll open that up to any of the panelists who would like to go first. It's a big question.
I think the reason that queerness is being linked mostly to sexuality is because we live in a transphobic world, and for all of us, we are still much more used to issues of queerness related to sexuality than to gender. You know, and it's great to observe that and to call us out on it and to say that in fact queerness is a much larger experience. And I think because so many of us on the panel identify as cis, we articulate it that way.
Yeah, Arlene.
I think they're asking, Diana and Melanie, you tell me if I'm wrong, I think you're asking something beyond trans, cis. You're asking about something that was addressed in that Armenian Review journal essay about queerness and Armenianness. And that is, I think that Kamee is referencing more. You can be queer and it might not necessarily relate to sexuality. Queer as in different, as in not straight, as in, is this what you mean, Diana?
Kamee, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll just jump in. For me, like, definitely my queerness is part of my sexuality. Like, I guess, just to clarify, just because I'm married to a cis man, that does not mean that that does not define like my sexuality in particular ways, of course. But just to say that what I find really queer about Armenian language is that we don't have gendered pronouns. So, for example, my child grew up speaking exclusively Armenian until they were like 2.5 years old, and then started learning English, and like still doesn't quite understand pronouns. Like, we'll use the wrong pronouns for people, and we use they pronouns with Sana. Sana's 4 now and identifies as non-binary, probably because I do, but also because that could just be how they arrive in the world. And when Armenians ask me about it, I say, because I don't want to have a conversation, because I'm not trying to politicize anybody, I'll say, oh, well, you know, in Armenian, we don't have gendered pronouns, so Sana's not used to them. So we just use they pronouns with Sana, right? So like, and that kind of ties back to that piece around language, right? And that's my way of getting out of like having really politicized conversations with strangers who are like, do you have more than 2 kids? Why are you using they pronouns? I was like, oh no, it's a language thing, you know, and then they can't say anything because if they say something, then they're racist. It's great. It's perfect.
Turkish is the same. Turkish doesn't have pronouns. That does not mean that it's not a patriarchal society, like Armenian is a patriarchal society. So the queerness, I'm not so sure how deeply that queerness goes.
I think you can exist in gender fluid ways within a patriarchal society, though. I mean, I do, and I present as femme to literally everybody in the world, not just Armenians, but I identify as non-binary, and so does my kiddo, you know? So I think it's like also experiential in that sense. I don't know if that just answers your question, Deanna.
There's another question in the chat from Armen, speaking about Armen of Armenia. Armen spoke about the importance of language to Armenian identity. I was struck by all the rhymes and the prose excerpt you read, something that would be difficult to pull off in English prose, I think. Can you comment on your use of rhyme? Is there a precedence for this in Armenian prose?
There are 3 questions in one comment. About the language, I can't speak for hours, about the language, and not about only the language, and about the literature also, because this culture is very literature-based. And if you see, I can give you just one example. For example, Vanos Iraderian, Vazgen Sargsyan, Levon Terpetrosyan, the founding fathers of this state, Armenia, are writers, all of them. Actually, there is this saying that Leo and Rafi created Armenianism as a national identity. So literature played a huge role. And we don't know, was it good or bad, but still there is no other nation maybe who had so many political leaders or leadership or elite coming from literary cycles. There are many, of course, and you know the experience of so crucially, yes, language and literature played a crucial role, but I wouldn't dare to say that Armenianism as identity is based only on language, because it's not true. We see in this group that it's not true. Some of you don't speak Armenian, but you still consider yourself as Armenians. So that's a long conversation. I wouldn't go into the details. And about the prose, it's an old language, and we geographically, we gained this situation because an Eastern and Western cultures influenced on us. So we have both poetic influences, and it's easy for Armenian author to play on rhythm. Actually, it's not difficult because the language itself gives you that opportunity to be very poetic, let's say. Like Farsi, for example, Iranian has also that ability. So it's not only my talent, but thanks to Armenian language as an old one, which has a great tradition of poetry, let's say.
I think there's one last question from Ariana in the chat. Any suggestions on other fellow queer Armenian authors who also write in Armenian? I think Diana, you put a couple in the chat. Shoshana Avakian, Lusine Vayachan. Others that folks would recommend? Queer authors writing in Armenian?
Armen, if you want to add any in the chat, please do. I think we have to be a little conscious of the time here. So.
There are now dozens of Armenian authors who are writing on LGBT issues. I will send you a list after, probably, or whoever is. Put that. Yes, you can put that in your library as well.
Yeah, well, actually, I haven't think that we can put it in the library and we can put it up on our website, the IALA website. So I will turn it over to Olivia.
Thank you, JP, and thank you to all the panelists for sharing, your work and such personal experiences, and just for being part of this space. It was such a treat to listen to the conversation, and I hope this is the first of many. Thank you to our audience members for coming, and to Flo Lowe for designing the poster for today's reading, and to Cyrus Sepabodi and Arthur Kaizakian for handling tech. Today's panel and last week's reading were recorded and will be posted to the IALA website and the Queer Armenian Library website. Please follow us on Twitter at Arm Literary, on Instagram at arm.lit, and on Facebook. Please also consider donating through our website so that we can continue to organize events celebrating Armenian writers. This event is funded in part by poets and writers with public funds from the New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of Governor Andrew Cuomo and the New York State Legislature. Thank you again so much to all our panelists, and to JP for moderating, and to the audience members for being a part of this conversation. It was really just such a treat, and I'm still sort of basking in the glow. So yes, have a good rest of your weekend, and we will see you soon. Thank you.
Recording stopped.